So in today's video, why do people collect things? Why I'm negative about positive psychology. Back to the story, because I've got a story to tell you. So I've got some top tips on writing the map report. If you are studying an undergraduate degree in psychology, I encourage you to think critically. It helps people like me stop doing stupid things. Okay, before I start talking about why people collect things, maybe I should say why I'm talking about this in the first place. Well, the good people of North Queensland here in Australia are going to hear me talk, well, some of them will, on the television tomorrow, because I'm getting interviewed by a reporter who's doing a piece on collecting, why people collect things. And she may also be looking at why people hoard things and why people do this thing called decluttering. And she's looking for a psychologist, and I stepped forward. So what I'm going to do is I'll share that with you just now, my thoughts, and if I can, I'll try and get a copy of this TV interview so you can see how it all turned out. Here we go. So why do people collect things? So I'm going to give you a psychological take on collecting, hoarding, and decluttering. First, it might be useful to think of the different things people collect. And broadly, we can categorize them into kind of three groups. First, there's primary collections. These are made up of objects that are made to be collected. So stickers for a sticker album, for example. The second group of things that are collected are called secondary collections. And these are made up of items that were designed for purposes other than collecting. They have a function, but they're collected not for their function, but for some other reason. So stamp collections is a good example of this. And then third, we have intangible collections. These are not actually collecting things, but not material objects, but it's still collecting. Here I'm thinking about bird watchers and train spotters. Now, why do people collect? Well, there's a whole area of psychology on this, and it does fascinate a number of psychologists. And there are many different views on why people collect. Now, my take on this is as a critical community psychologist, which means you may notice me moving beyond the individual and onto some broader level analysis. In my view, collecting functions in a number of ways. First, it gives people a goal to pursue, a challenge, something to search for.
We're missing Antiques Roadshow.
It's like the joy of a treasure hunt. The thrill is in the searching just as much as it is in the finding of the treasure. So there's a buzz in the anticipation of finding the item that you're looking for. It also connects people to one another. This is through swapping items or comparing collections, but also it connects people to people in a sense that objects in a collection can give you a sentimental attachment to a time in history or a place or a person. I, for example, collect shells and stones. I don't collect shells anymore because that's environmentally not encouraged. But I collect little stones from places I visit. And that, when I bring my stones out, as long as I've categorized them properly, they remind me of the places that I've been. Some people collect things that remind them of people that they've met. So the next thing is collecting can make you feel part of something that's bigger. You're literally making something big, the collection, out of something small, the items that go into the collection. But you can also feel emotionally part of something else through a collection. So collecting objects linked to your favorite footy club, for example, can make you feel part of that footy team. Collecting can also give you social status. You are unique because of what you collect, or you have a social status because of the value of your collection. So maybe we collect things because we want to feel valued by others. We have a collection that's rare or interesting or just mind-bogglingly large. The status of the collection might be measured also by its monetary value. So there are collectors who collect because it's a good financial investment. Now, increasingly, collecting is becoming monetized, the collector economy, we call it. So we might find that collecting becomes a bit skewed by commercial interests. I'm just going to give you a quick bit of history about the whole social practice of collecting. And it's quite interesting. It's interesting that collecting only really became popular with the public during the first Industrial Revolution, when manufactured goods became relatively cheap. And prior to this, people largely collected things that they needed for day-to-day existence, or when they needed to store things in anticipation of future scarcity. So collecting wood or collecting food and storing food, things like that. Now, at that time, it was the rich people who were the collectors. So the public generally didn't collect things, but rich people collected things. And what I'm talking about is collecting things in the sense of collecting something that you have a sentimental attachment to. So generally, the public or poor people didn't collect things they had a sentimental attachment to. They collected things that they needed, like food and wood for fire, stuff like that. So once goods were mass-produced and became cheaper, poor people had something else that they could collect that wasn't going to cost them much money. And they started collecting things. But these weren't great treasures, These were things that actually had no or little monetary value. The value people placed in their collections was purely at that sentimental level. Now, these days, people can find objects for their collections relatively easily because our economic system aims to bring collectors with people who can provide the items, bring them closer as buyers and sellers. It's kind of become commercialized, So you can now complete your collection. If it's a primary or secondary collection you're doing, you can do that very easily, very quickly. And that might take away some of those other ways collecting functions. If part of the joy of collecting is in the searching for the objects, it's the hunting for the treasure rather than just finding the treasure. That hunting for the treasure has kindly been made too easy, really. You could just get on the internet, find the thing that you need, order it. And if you've got the money to buy it, you've got it in a few days. Except if you're in Australia, where it could take a couple of weeks. So the hunt for the treasure is now becoming something you can sidetrack, and that's kind of interesting. I'm wondering if it kind of changes what collecting is all about. If people who collect in that way kind of don't get the same sort of satisfaction as the people who have to hunt down the objects for their collection. It could take them years to get the things that they need to make their collection complete. Now, the second question I've been asked by the journalist is, at what point does collecting become a problem? Become pathological? Something that's not called collecting anymore, but might be called hoarding, for example. Now, this usually happens when collecting causes other people a problem. Most pathologies are really often about other people's response to someone's behavior, rather than the behavior itself. Now, collecting can also become a problem when the person who's doing the collecting loses their sense of meaning in relation to what they're doing. This is when it might be seen again as hoarding. So if they say their collection of newspapers is all about having a record of events, so that if they need to know what happened on, say, February the 1st, 1990, they'll be able to look it up in one of their newspapers that they've collected. But if you ask the person where that newspaper is and they don't know, they can't find it, they haven't categorized it, it's then that you realize that that collection is not really meeting the function that the person's collecting it for, so maybe it's no longer a collection. That's a fairly crude way of testing, to trying to get a sense of, actually, is it a collection or is it just a load of rubbish that the person is hoarding up? Now, when someone's collecting something because of sentimental reasons rather than a reason for, keeping a clear record of how news reporting has been done over the years, or a clear record of social events as captured in newspapers, if it's for a more sentimental reason, so then it becomes harder to tell when a collection is not really working as a collection. So if someone collects newspapers, not for the stories contained in the newspapers, but because they like having stacks of newspapers around them, it's an aesthetic or a feeling for them, it's hard to show that the collection is not functioning for that person anymore. You can't say to the person, right, okay, go and get me that feeling. Go and show me that feeling that you're getting from the newspapers. It's not that tangible a thing that you can put your finger on. But what you can do is you can point to a stack of newspapers and ask, what's the story behind those newspapers? Usually, if it's a collection, There'll be some sort of sentiment attached to it, and each item in the collection will have a story that's attached to it. That sentiment is shaped as a story. If there's no story attached to the items in the collection, then that might be the point at which you might say that actually that's not really a collection. We might call it clutter, and we might call that person a hoarder rather than a collector. Now, the third, these are just my views, by the way. Other people have different views on this stuff. But the third question that I'm going to be asked is, why do people embrace the reverse of collecting, which is decluttering? There's this whole big thing about decluttering your home. People particularly do it over the holiday period, particularly over New Year's period. What drives this urge to clean out all of your stuff from your house, to declutter your house? Well, it's probably quite complicated. It might be because some people don't work well or can't relax when they're surrounded by clutter, and that they have previously not had the time to remove the clutter from their lives, so they just get it all done in the holidays. It may also be because of social pressure. You do declutter, not because you don't like the clutter, but because you feel you're not meant to like clutter. Or it's not really the clutter that's the problem, but it's what other people will think of you when they see your clutter. Again, the problem is what other people think that clutter signifies, i.e., you live in a messy house, maybe that people will think that means that you're a disreputable person. Another more powerful reason might be that our society encourages us to consume more and more, but if we are to be well-behaved consumers, we need to dispose of things more and more. We have to throw out the old stuff to make room for the new stuff. Bad consumers are people who keep stuff just in case it might be needed in the future. That culture at the time of World War I and World War II, mend and make do, people called it, where people were quite thrifty, didn't throw out stuff and buy new stuff. They kept stuff, repaired it, made do with what they had, and so on. That culture's been displaced by this culture of buying new stuff and getting rid of the old stuff. So we have this idea that it's good to declutter. So maybe decluttering might be good for the consumer economy, but it might not be so good for us, and maybe it's not so good for the environment, because we don't really declutter. We just move our clutter somewhere else so that it becomes someone else's problem. For example, charity shops these days are starting to become overwhelmed by people's clutter. People are just passing on their old stuff onto charity shops, and charity shops can't cope with all of the clutter that we're dumping on them. Also, a lot of it ends in landfill sites. When we declutter, it all gets shifted out into a landfill site, which is not really that good for the environment. And it's not good for us because, we have to spend more money on new things, which means we have to earn more money. Now, some people declutter and then live a minimalist life, but that's not minimalist, is it, eh? So we're also forced into decluttering because of the built-in obsolescence in much of what we now buy. For companies who want you to buy their stuff, and if they can't put a use-by date on it, like food, they have to find another means by which to ensure you don't keep that stuff for long, that you use it for a while, then you throw it away and buy some new stuff. And they can make sure you do this by ensuring that what you buy, the stuff you buy, doesn't work for very long. It stops working after a period of time. For example, non-replaceable batteries that we have in things these days, where when the battery dies, the device dies and you have to buy a new device. iPhones do that. But also clothing. There's this thing about stockings, that they purposefully designed stockings to ladder easily so that they wouldn't last that long and people would have to keep buying new pairs of stockings. There's lots of examples of this. Or you can make that item incompatible with the other stuff you've got, and people do this through innovating technology. The old analog TVs now don't work. Now you need a digital TV because they've upgraded the technology. Or you can attach negative social value to an item.
I'm officially old and uncool.
So that after a certain amount of time, it becomes embarrassing to own the device or use the device. Like having an iPhone 5 Having an iPhone 5 is no longer a sign that you're a cool, successful person. You need to have an iPhone X. And maybe by the time you watch this video, it'll be the iPhone X1 or whatever the next iteration's going to be. Now, some final thoughts for you. The interesting thing to look at, I think, are the people who collect the intangible things. Haven't talked about them much, have I? You know, these are the bird watchers and the train spotters. So they're collecting things that aren't that easy to commodify, aren't that easy to monetize, because they're not collecting material things. They're expressing something perhaps in us all that transcends that collecting of material objects. Takes us away from collecting things for commercial value, but maybe takes us back to that thing about collecting that fulfills a need in us all. Maybe it gives us a glimpse of, you know, something about the human spirit, about how we like searching for meaning, and we like to try and make sense of the chaos that surrounds us. Maybe it shows something about us that sits beyond the objects we collect. Maybe it's about looking for something different, something rare, chalking it up to our experience. Maybe it gives us back that sense that difference is not the thing to be feared, but the thing that's the real treasure we're hunting for. Looking for that item that's rare and not yet discovered, and that item that's different from all the items that we have in our collection. Maybe something about celebrating human diversity. I don't know. I've overextended my knowledge here. Anyway, I'm collecting subscribers, by the way. So subscribe to my video if you haven't yet done so. So, till next time, till I find something else to talk about. See you later. Ta-ra.